Hello, and here we are for our discussion of product management. The previous video we talked about product concepts. In this discussion, we will look at product management, and we are going to discuss two primary topics in this video. The first one's going to be new product development. Excuse me. And the second one is going to be, the second topic is going to be the product life cycle, or the PLC. All right, so let's jump right into it. And with respect to new product development, I'm going to take a very broad perspective. Um, you can go and you can read largely the academic literature, which sometimes gets kind of snoozy at times. Um, but there are people out there who make very, very finely tuned distinctions in terms of what a new product is. By contrast, we're going to take a very broad perspective, and so we're going to say that new products refer to development of new products and product modification. So, for example, sometimes you might see a product and it might say new and improved. We're going to consider that for the purposes of our discussion. We're going to consider that a new product. There are people out there who, as I mentioned just a minute ago, who would say absolutely not. If it's new and improved, it's not a new product. Yada yada yada. Again, kind of the minuteness of the distinction, because some people would argue that the only type of new product there is, it has to be a totally revolutionary, not an evolutionary, but a revolutionary product. And if you start thinking about products that are out there, how many of them really, fall into that category? All right, so new products. They're essential to an organization's long-term survival. All right, they're essential to an organization's long-term survival. You say, well, I'm sure glad I paid a lot of money to take this course so that you could tell me that new products are essential to an organization's long-term survival. That is one of the key aspects about new products. If you think about and this might be difficult for you because most of you are, I'd say probably early 20s. Some of you are mid to later 20s, I think, because some of you are master students taking this course. But if you think back to what PCs were like the first time you remember what a PC was like, a personal computer, right? And if you think about what they were like when you first remember what PCs or personal computers were, and if you compare that to what they are now, right, what they look like, how they act, or how they function and stuff like that, even in your lifetime, right, what a PC, what a personal computer looks like, and how it functions and its capabilities are much different, right? Because quite honestly, if you were still trying to convince people to buy what was being offered, back in the late 1990s or early 2000s, you wouldn't be in business very long. And that, right? So in order to stick around, organizations have to have new products because one of the things that we talked about before is you got all these macro environmental factors, right? The macro environmental factors change through time. Customer expectations change through time, right? So, stuff changes. A second reason for the importance of the new product development discussion is because so many of new products are not successful. Right, and again, part of there's a number of statistics out there that if you have nothing better to do, you just might Google and find out what percent of new products are failures. Part of it depends on, okay, so how do you define a new product, and the second issue is how do you define a failure, right? But because so many new products aren't successful, it becomes really important for the new products that are successful to make enough, to generate enough revenues to cover the cost for the products that aren't successful. And so you got to have these successful products because, you know, you're not going to bat 1,000, right? Every product you bring out isn't going to be successful. Every product modification isn't going to be successful. So there's a large degree of failure that's associated with new products, and as a result, there is a new product development process. And as pointed out a couple of times thus far in the course, you know, following a particular process doesn't guarantee success, but what it does is it kind of reduces the chances of failure because there's a sequential order of things. And so you're not just, you know, taking the old, as I like to say, take the Jello, throw it at a wall and see what sticks approach. There's kind of a method behind the madness of what an organization is doing. And again, an organization that follows the process, right, the new product development process, it doesn't guarantee success, but what it does is it reduces the chances of failure because there's a sequential process. There are points at which, kind of like, you know, you can just put up your hands and say, okay, we're not going to go any further because what we have here probably isn't going to be successful in the marketplace. All right, so the process is there has to be a starting point, and the starting point is you got to come up with ideas, right? New product development comes up with the starting point is what is known as idea generation. And the question is, well, where do these ideas come from? Where can these new product ideas come from? And they can come internally, right? A number of organizations have research and development departments, so you can get information internally, or you can get ideas internally. And there's also external, right? For example, customers. And I was just, as I was preparing this discussion, I went and I Googled, and because it struck me that the last couple of years, and I haven't seen anything about 2018 yet, but the last couple of years, Doritos has been sponsoring a contest to come up with like new flavors of Doritos. And so the point being that it's not always a firm itself or an organization itself that has the good ideas. The good ideas can come from external constituencies to include customers. So the first step is to come up with a set of ideas. And this whole process, this whole new product development process, is kind of like a funnel. You start big and broad, and then you start to narrow, and then you narrow some more, and then you narrow some more, and then hopefully by the time you get to the bottom of the funnel, right, you've got something that's going to be successful in the marketplace. So once you've got the ideas, the next step is to screen the ideas, and this involves basically taking the ideas that you have and trying to evaluate them in terms of, you know, kind of their suitability, right? Or is this just the dumbest idea that I've ever heard? And so what you're trying to do in the idea screening phase is you're trying to kind of weed out the poor ideas and keep the good ideas. Now, to be fair, what good organizations do is periodically the good organizations will go back, maybe every 3 or 4 years, a good organization will go back and it will look at some of the ideas that it might have put aside, because, you know, the macro environmental factors change, right? You know, the economic situation can change, the technology situation can change, the political and legal situation can change, the socio-cultural situation can change. And so because the macro environmental factors are changing over time, what a good organization will do is periodically go back and revisit the ideas that have been set aside in an earlier phase to see whether or not they might be appropriate, you know, going down the road. All right, so we've generated ideas, we've screened ideas, and then the next step involves concept testing. And this is the first external validation of the idea, because all we have right now, all we have is an idea. Right? We've come up with idea or ideas. And what we've done in the idea screening phase is we've kind of initially vetted those ideas. And then what you do in the concept testing phase is you take the ideas that have survived the idea screening process and you take them and present them to prospective customers. You might use things like focus groups. One of the things that was talked about in the book in the marketing research chapter. You just might, and again, you're not talking about anything really physical or tangible at the time. You're still talking about an idea, right, or ideas. And what you're doing in the concept testing phase is you're just running those ideas, because internally you say, oh yeah, these are great ideas, and then you run them, you run them across a group of prospective customers, and they go, this is the dumbest idea I've ever heard of. Well, hey, don't go any further. Now, you might be sitting there saying to yourself, you're taking a lot of time on this. Man, it's true, I am. And that's a key thing, because, to follow the new product development process, it is a time-consuming process, and anything that takes time is also going to be costly. So you might ask yourself the question, well, once we come up with this wonderful idea, why don't we just make it and put it out on the market? And you can do that, right? There's no law that says that you can't do that, but, right, the chances of kind of maybe overlooking something or missing something, or maybe even coming out with a product that nobody needs or nobody wants, it could be pretty great if you just say, hey, we got an idea, let's run with it. The flip side of it is that following this particular process, it does take time, and it does cost money. And some firms, like to say, well, wait a minute, we need to get this out to the market, because you can read the stuff. There's potential advantages to being an early to market organization on certain products. All right, so we've idea generated, we've screened ideas, we've concept tested, and you say, oh, let's make a prototype. No. Because you don't want to make a prototype just yet, right? You don't want to do the product development stuff just yet. What you could do is, or what you should do, is do the business analysis, right? And this is where the organization develops projections for revenues, costs, and profitability. And so basically, okay, so you've got a few ideas, you've vetted them with prospective customers, the customers have given you a green light with the ideas. Rather than running and chasing every idea, what the wise firm does is basically, okay, so let's do pro forma stuff. Let's try to figure out what the demand for this product is going to be, what it's going to cost us to make it, and market it and stuff like that. And then you can go, okay, well, we got 3 products, and product A over here is clearly, right, looks like it's going to be the winner in the clubhouse. One of the things that often happens, right, and this is just human nature. One of the things that often happens in this part of the process is that the company or a particular individual or a couple of people will dramatically overestimate the revenues, and those same people might dramatically underestimate the cost. So if you overestimate the revenues and underestimate the cost, right, boy, it looks like we got a really wonderful product here that everybody's gonna like. And so there's a lot of bias that goes on. Particularly, it's like, look, you could be the person that comes up with, I don't know, you're the inventor of the iPhone, right? I mean, yeah. And so God only knows you want the world to know that the iPhone is your baby. So you're going to say, yeah, everybody in the world, all 7.4 billion people in the world are going to buy one of these things. And yeah, we'll be able to make them for like 4 cents. And so we'll make so much money, you won't know how much, we don't even know how much money there is in the world for this kind of stuff. So there's sometimes there's a bias, and I actually did this one time. I have a friend that I went to high school with, and we wanted to retire by the time we were 35, and to make a long story short, we decided to come up with something called the Genuine Ugly Bag. And you can actually go out and you can actually Google the Genuine Ugly Bag, and you can see what a Genuine Ugly Bag looked like. That was not my stuff, but as part of the process, because I was getting my master's in business administration at the time, I was put in charge of kind of finding out like what the costs were to make the product, and we were going to sell these things. We were going to sell them for like $2, and the costs were ridiculously low because I mean you're dealing with paper bags and you got to put a little bit of printing on the paper bag and then you've got to like distribute the stuff. But we were looking at gigantic profit margins. You know, maybe 20 cents cost total and $2 in revenue, and so 2 minus 20 cents from 2 is $1.80, and we're like, whoop, we're retired by the time we're 35. We didn't never pursued it. Some other people pursued it, but that's the kind of thing that a wise organization is going to do. They're going to run the numbers to see whether or not the idea has merit. If so, then you can do the product development, right? Which is where a prototype or model of the product is shown to prospective customers, for their input. And a really interesting situation on this I was doing some work with Little Tikes, probably 20 years ago. Little Tikes is the toy manufacturer. It's headquartered down in Hudson, Ohio. It's about a half hour, 35 minutes from John Carroll. And they actually had a room. They had an on-site daycare thing, and what they had is this room where they would put the young children. And when Little Tikes was developing toys, because think about, right, who develops toys, right? The adults come up with the ideas for the toys, the kids use the toys, and oftentimes what happens is, kids use toys in a very different manner than the adults who designed them ever thought that the toy might be used. And so Little Tikes would had this room where they had all these toys, some of which were legitimate toys already out in the market, and others were prototypes. And one of the things they had was they had people sitting behind the windows, right? They were one-way mirrors. One-way windows, and you could see out but not in, right? And the people in the room could see how the little kids were interacting with the prospective toy to see whether or not there was any design modifications that needed to be, or whether or not it's like, holy smokes, we never thought of maybe having a toy that would have this particular capability, right? So. Woo! Yeah, we got the prototype. Let's bring it to the market. No, maybe we need to do some test marketing, right? And again, test marketing it refers to basically introducing the product in a limited number of markets or a market, right, with a full complement of marketing, the 4 Ps, right, to get a sense for how the product performs in an actual market situation. Now, the challenge is that test marketing can cost a lot of money, it can take a lot of time, but it can uncover a multitude of potential issues with the problem before you finally make the kind of, hey, let's commercialize, which is the final step in the new product development process, before you make the commercialization determination. Right, and so for example, one of the things, and this is one of the urban legend kinds of things, is a number of years ago, probably over 30 years ago now, McDonald's was test marketing pizza in I believe it was Evansville, Indiana. And one of the things that they discovered was that one of their challenges with the bringing out pizza as a product at McDonald's was that the pizza box wouldn't fit through the drive-through window. That's why you do test marketing sometimes. You say, okay. And as I mentioned, once once an organization has concluded the test market, and assuming that that the results are favorable, then the organization can make a determination of whether or not to introduce the product on a large scale or full scale nature, the commercialization thing. That's an important phase, because the second major topic that we're going to talk about is what is known as the product life cycle, or the PLC. And the product life cycle, or the PLC, refers to the phases that a product goes through from the beginning, from its beginning to its end. And so where commercialization begins, and actually before the commercialization, right? Like this whole process that we just talked about is part of the product life cycle, and so um, the product life cycle has 5 phases. The first is product development, which is that whole thing that we just talked about. Then there's the introductions, right? It's when the product is first introduced to the market. And one of the key things to keep in mind with the product life cycle is that the marketing strategies and marketing tactics should be managed according to the nature of the particular stage or phase of the product life cycle. So, for example, in the introductory phase, which is when the new product is first introduced to the market, one of the things that is really important for marketers to keep in mind is you probably don't want to be out of stock of a product. And so making sure that you have the product in stock is paramount. And so you might do things from a logistics perspective to ensure, right? You might be putting a lot of your product on airplanes in order to make sure that you have sufficient inventory at location so that if people want to buy your product, it's available to be purchased. All right. So you got the introduction, which is commercialization. The following introduction is what is known as the growth phase, and this is where there is a rapid increase in sales volume. And so, one of the things that becomes very important is the ability to kind of keep up with demand. Again, you want to have product in stock, but what starts to happen in the growth phase is that you would tend to see competitors start to enter the market, and so now there becomes some pricing pressures, and so there's a different approach to pricing in the growth stage as opposed to in the introductory stage. Once you get beyond the growth stage, products enter what is known as a maturity phase, and this is where the sales of the product begin to slow, and there tends to be a tremendous amount of competition, which means that you're going to have tremendous pricing issues. And what you start to see in this phase is you start to see companies looking for ways to either modify the product, which is called product modification. So this is where you might see new and improved products, right? Or you might see market modification. So you do market modification, meaning either finding new markets for the product or getting existing users to use the product more. So a number of years ago, the orange juice manufacturers had a slogan that orange juice wasn't just for breakfast anymore, because a lot of times people say, oh, the only time you drink orange juice is at breakfast. Well, no, but historically, what people in the United States did is, orange juice was considered to be a beverage that you consumed in the morning and oftentimes with your breakfast. And in order to kind of encourage particularly current users, because it's a lot easier to get current users to use more sometimes than it is to get new users to use something that they don't use, the orange juice manufacturers say, hey, why don't you have, it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you're thirsty, why don't you have a glass of orange juice, right? So that would be an example of market modification. And the final stage in the product life cycle is what is known as decline, and this is where there's an absolute decline in sales. And oftentimes what you will see organizations do is they will basically what's called milk, M-I-L-K, the brand, which means they'll pretty much reduce all non-essential expenditures in an effort to maximize kind of the contribution margin. And so, an example would be, and I go back to the stuff that I started out at the beginning of the topic, is if you think about personal computers, if you go back 20 years, desktops were really prevalent 20 years ago. They're nowhere near as prevalent now. You can still buy them, right? But the desktop people, you know, the Dells and the Hewlett Packards of the world, they're not really spending a lot of time and money promoting the fact that you can buy a desktop, right? And so, you know, they're still there, but they're nowhere near as prevalent in terms of promotion or marketing expenditures as they were 20 years ago. Wow, I was particularly long-winded in this particular discussion, so we will stop there and see you for the first of the 3 videos that we will do with respect to the place function. Bye for now.